Hello, how you doing? And welcome back to the channel. So the Champions Cup final is locked in. Following the semi-finals this weekend, Leinster will face La Rochelle in Dublin in 3 weeks' time. Two interesting but relatively one-sided semi-finals. So that's what I'm going to look back on in this video. A few different things to take out from each game, mainly the Leinster-Toulouse game, but I've got lots of different things to get into. So make sure you drop a comment down below. Let me know what you think of these two games, and let me know what you think of what sort of final we could see. La Rochelle, the defending champions, Leinster looking to get revenge for last year and get their hands back on that trophy. Could be absolutely fascinating. Also, like the video and subscribe to the channel, but let's get into it. The question really, following Leinster against Toulouse, that first semi-final, is can La Rochelle stop Leinster? I said in my preview to the semi-finals video at the back end of last week, I think the winner of the tournament will come from that game between Leinster and Toulouse, and nothing I've seen this weekend has really changed my mind. I'll come on to the La Rochelle game in just a moment, but I don't think we can't actually take as much from that performance as maybe in other circumstances, because I just think they were so much better than Exeter. But I will get on to that game. Let's start with that first semi-final, and Leinster ultimately just did the job on Toulouse, didn't they? It was actually Toulouse that started the game the better. When they got that first try, you're thinking, all right, here we go, game on here. Can they get Leinster under pressure? Can they try and squeeze them? Can they use that French power game to make them uncomfortable at home and see how they react? And actually, Leinster at the start of the game, first couple of penalties they got in front of the post, they were kicking for the post. They were taking the three, which I actually thought was quite interesting. A sign of respect, maybe, just trying to build that score. They weren't immediately going for the corner and backing their driving maul. But, and this I think is the biggest takeaway from this game, it's not really anything new. We knew it already, but I think this match was a great example of that you cannot blink against Leinster. You cannot give them a way in. And that's unfortunately what Toulouse did on two occasions with the two yellow cards. First one for Thomas Ramos, and then after that point, Leinster went and scored a couple of tries. They stopped taking those 3 points and going for posts. They were kicking to the corner, and by the time he came back onto the pitch, they had bit of a mountain to climb already, really, when you consider they're away to Leinster in Dublin. It's always going to be difficult when you've allowed them to build up that score. And Leinster was so good at taking that opportunity, biding their time. When they had the man advantage, they made them punish. And actually, because there were two yellow cards in the game, one in each half for Toulouse, across those two yellow cards, Toulouse conceded 28 points. In my opinion, that's the game right there. You cannot blink against Leinster. They're a brilliant team as it is. If you start giving them momentum, if you start giving them men advantage, they are going to capitalise on it. If I was La Rochelle, if I was looking at that game and I'm Ronan O'Gara, I'm saying, boys, we have to be on it in terms of our discipline for that final. We cannot give them a sniff. We have to try and keep it tight. Unfortunately, from the perspective of I was hoping Leinster and Toulouse would be a better semi-final, in all honesty. They weren't able to do that, and Leinster ultimately got the victory. One caveat in there, though, and I think Toulouse made a big mistake in their bench split of 6-2. And actually, maybe it's one of those that it's a mistake because of what transpired in the game, but because of the early injuries in the back line, Dupont was shifted around. And after that, it was 65 minutes where Dupont wasn't really playing 9. It was all a little bit of a mess. When he's your general, when he's the guy that gets your team ticking, it's like a metronome, isn't he, when he's playing so well? That was always going to be an issue for Toulouse as well. So I think ultimately that became their undoing. Maybe in a parallel universe, they didn't have that injury. All of a sudden, they've got more forwards coming off the bench, adding more power. The game might have been tighter. Who knows? But I think in hindsight, they'll look at that and they came unstuck there a little bit as well. The other observation from a Leinster point of view, and I'm really interested from Leinster fans for you guys to comment down below on this, is I think they've learned from last year, where you look at the URC and you look at the Champions Cup, and on both occasions, they kind of just got out-muscled, really. They got beat up a bit. It was almost a bit of a throwback to some of the brilliant European games we've seen them play against Saracens, when Saracens got the better of them, where they just squeezed them. They beat them up. They were so good defensively, and Leinster couldn't deal with it. I actually felt this was a brilliant example of how Leinster have been able to develop their game, because you look at this match, and you look at the Leinster backline, missing Sexton, missing Henshaw, missing James Lowe, and you think all of a sudden, it's still a good backline, but it's not quite as strong as it normally would be. But I still thought their pack was just so good. And the forwards, out-muscled and outplayed the Toulouse forwards. And for me, that's quite a sign of progress, actually, that they've learnt from last year. They've identified where they slipped up and why they missed out on silverware. They've corrected that. And now, even if their backline isn't ticking in the way or doesn't have the personnel that they would ideally want, their forward pack is still able to get the job done. Let me know what you think down below on that, but I would be massively encouraged, particularly looking ahead to that final against La Rochelle and their forward pack, if I was a Leinster fan. The final thing now, and it's a bit of a negative that I want to mention from this semi-final, is the Van der Fleer incident for the second Toulouse yellow card. Now, first of all, I think it is a yellow card. And actually, I thought Wayne Barnes came to the correct decision. There's a lot of referees that I think would have shown a red card there. But for me, why Wayne Barnes is the best ref in the world at the moment is his ability to be able to assess a situation, look at things and say, look, we're not entirely sure. It's a yellow card, not a red card. So I understand and I think it's right that a card was given. However, and this is something I have a problem with, for me, we're starting to see this more in the game. Van der Fleer sells it as well. And we are starting to see players, because they know how sensitive the game is and the officials are around head contact, starting to sell things like that, starting to dive a little bit, really. I thought Van der Fleer did that. I thought he flopped a little bit. I think, and this is no knock on them as players, by the way, Van der Fleer's brilliant, Johnny Sexton's brilliant. Sexton's another one who we've seen on occasions. As soon as a bit of contact gets towards that face or neck area, he's quickly to try and point that out to the officials, grabbing it, going to ground, I think a little bit easily. Now, am I being unfair here? Or is that something that actually we should be concerned about? Because I looked at that incident and on first viewing, I thought Van der Fleer has flopped to the ground in a fashion to draw the referee's attention to it. I don't know. Let me know what you think down below. I think it probably was a yellow card. I just don't like the fact that players are perhaps now starting to exaggerate those moments to be able to get a player sin min or a penalty or whatever it might be. But ultimately, Leinster, as we knew, utterly brilliant. For me, they're going to win the Champions Cup, in my opinion. But the second semi-final, La Rochelle, Exeter, also not particularly one-sided. I'll come back to that because I was disappointed in how competitive the semi-finals were. It was a complete mismatch. I mean, La Rochelle, I don't quite understand how La Rochelle have gone from struggling to beat Gloucester at home in the last 16 to doing a job on Saracens and completely dispatching Exeter. I mean, they look such a better team already. I think maybe that Gloucester game was a shot in the arm for La Rochelle, just to remind them that they had to step it up a little bit because they were brilliant. Exeter, I thought Exeter almost did what they could do. You could tell in the early exchanges, they were bringing massive amounts of physicality. They were so on it. They knew what they had to do. They ultimately just aren't as good as La Rochelle at the moment. When Exeter had the ball, I know they scored really early on, first try of the game, but generally, if we're looking at the phase play in that game, they didn't really look like breaking La Rochelle down. They got demolished at the scrum. And yeah, it was a mismatch. And La Rochelle, I thought, looked incredibly impressive. The thing for La Rochelle now is, I guess there's two parts of this. First of all, I don't think that Exeter game is enough of a warm-up, enough of a test for us to be able to look at it and say, well, they could really trouble Leinster. We know that they can based upon last year, but I don't think this game on its own is enough to be able to convince us of that. On the flip side, though, the positive, I think, for La Rochelle is their scrum, because even in that second half, there was an occasion where the Toulouse scrum started to trouble Leinster a little bit, and there were enough areas of the game that Leinster, I mean, they were quite heavily up by that point anyway, but I wonder whether La Rochelle will look at the scrum. I think that's an area we can target them. If we can beat them there, if we can start getting momentum there, where could that potentially lead? So look, it is an interesting final. We'll speak more about it in three weeks' time, but I just think Leinster at this moment in time are looking too good, but I would have said that last year as well, and we all know what happened. So we shall wait and see. The final point I wanted to end the video on is we're still waiting for that classic game this year, aren't we, in the Champions Cup? We have had some good matches. I know there have been good games, particularly, you know, Exeter beating Montpellier in extra time in the last 16. There's been a few others here and there. We need a good final. I was disappointed really in these semi-finals. Both semi-finals were done at half-time, realistically. And I think that's a bit of a shame. We want a classic game. Hopefully we get it in the final. As I said at the start of the video, let me know what you think down below on anything that I mentioned. I'm really interested as well in the whole players trying to buy penalties and yellow cards thing as well. Let me know if you agree with me on that point. But anything, any comment, I always love to hear from you. Like the video and subscribe to the channel as well. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.